In this video, we're going to be changing the engine oil or motor oil in a Smart 4.4. Now, the type of car doesn't matter. The same principles and procedures will apply to pretty much any car or truck out there. So today, this video is going to be aimed at absolute beginners. Those of you with limited to no tools, I'm going to show you exactly how this procedure works. And this could be the start of many DIY projects for you in the future to come. Okay, stay tuned and let's get going. So we're inside the car now. The first thing I always do is just warm the car up slightly. I'm talking about 5 minutes maximum. We don't want to warm it up fully, otherwise the oil will be very hot and we might burn our hands when changing the oil. So just get it warm slightly, and that way the flow of the oil will come out a lot easier as when the engine is cold. The next thing is apply the parking brake or the handbrake. What this does, it keeps the rear wheels of the car frozen solid. It applies the brakes on the rear wheels of the car. So when we jack the front end in the air, then the car's not going to roll anywhere. If our body is under here, we know the back wheels are solid and it's not going to crush us, which is a safety critical thing. If you're only jacking up one corner of the front end and you have a manual transmission, we can leave the car in gear as well. That way it's going to be frozen there as well. So there's a few safety things you can do, but using the parking brake here is a necessity. It's going to keep us very safe while working underneath the car. Okay, let's go. Now, what do we need to get started with this project? Well, some of these things will be optional, as you're going to find out in the rest of the video, but there are 2 things we will need for sure. Actually 3. We're going to need some replacement engine oil. Now, all the engine oil in there, we need to get it out somehow. So there's a drain bolt in the bottom that we're going to remove and drain all the old oil out and then put new oil in. Secondly, we need an oil filter. There's little metal particles and impurities in there. We need to run the oil through a filter. Now, the old filter is already attached to the car, and typically when you change the engine oil, you also put a filter in as well. So this is the thing we're going to be doing today. New oil, drain the old oil and replace the oil filter. What else do we need? Well, we need to take the drain bolt off. We need to remove the old oil. So underneath the car, there's going to be a hidden bolt. Now, depending on the year, make and model of car, this could look differently. It could be in a different location, but typically it's underneath the engine. We're going to look at that soon. So we're going to need a long wrench, something like this, or even a breaker bar. The reason the wrench is long, we get more leverage, and these bolts can get very tight and seized on. So something like this. We're going to need a socket depending on the type of drain bolt we have. It could be hexagonal. It could even be something like this, but it will depend on the year, make and model of car you have. Next, sometimes these oil filters are really hard to remove. You can get 2 hands in there, they won't come undone, so we may need an oil filter removal tool. It's just basically a little bit of rubber like that, a little rubber hoop, hooks onto the old one and undoes it. We need a way to get the car in the air. Now, getting the car in the air could be optional. If you have a car which is high profile, so it's quite high off the floor, we may not need a jack or some jack stands or car ramps at all. Maybe we can sneak in there. And there's also a tip as well. You can drive your car on a curb to get access underneath the vehicle. So this could be optional. It does depend on the year, make and model of the car. We may need a device to get the new oil in the car, so something like a funnel works. And lastly, we need somewhere for the old oil to go. I have an oil drain pan here, which is pretty cool. The oil will go in here and we can drain it out the side. Or if you don't have that, you might have a washing up bowl or anything like that. We just need a container for the old oil in the car. And one more thing, it does get very messy, this project. So you may need some gloves, something like this, to keep your hands clean. Again, kind of optional. Some rags don't go amiss. If you spill things, you can always clean it up. And a nice big cardboard sheet as well. You may get some stray oil that might overshoot the can. So it's always good to have a nice big piece of cardboard here to catch any residual oil. Now, this is pretty much everything you're going to need for this project. So let's get going. So now the car is ready to go. Let's just talk about the type of oil we need. What type of oil do I need? This is a 5W30 full synthetic. This is a 10W40 semi-synthetic. What oil do I need? Well, the oil can be found in many places. Sometimes if the car is nice enough, it might tell us what type of oil is on the oil cap right here. Unfortunately, this doesn't. So there are some other places we can check for this information. We can check the service manual. Sometimes it's written in the service manual. We can Google it. We can type in the year, make and model of the car and it'll tell us what oil it takes. Or you can go to certain websites that sell oil and they will gladly sell you the oil for your car. Places like AutoZone and Walmart in America, O'Reilly's, and in the UK, places like Halfords. Give them the year, make and model. They will tell you exactly what oil goes in your car. You don't even need to worry or think about it. They also have websites where you can plug in this information and it will tell you the oil you need. And lastly, let's just talk about full synthetic and non-synthetic and semi-synthetic and everything like that. Typically in the old days, people would use standard dinosaur oil, but these days we have all kinds of synthetic oils available. Synthetic oils have more performance enhancing things. It offers less frequency between oil changes. Almost in every way, a full synthetic oil is better than traditional oil. There's only one caveat: if you have a very old car and you put full synthetic in there, people say some of the seals leak and things like that. But typically, other than things accidentally leaking, full synthetic oil does not cause any harm to any vehicle out there. It is always the best substitution for any kind of oil in a car. So if you're not sure which oil to get, always go with full synthetic. And on the topic of locating the exact oil for your car, this is a 5W30. So this is the viscosity of the oil, the thickness of the oil. You can do exactly the same thing to locate the type and size of oil filter for your car. Literally go to a website like Halfords, AutoZone, plug in your year, make and model, and they will gladly sell you an oil filter which is compatible with your car. So now we have everything we need to do the oil change on this car. Let's jack the car in the air and get the car on jack stands. If you have car ramps, that's no problem. Drive your car on the car ramps. The basic principle is we need to be able to get underneath the car to do the oil change. I'm going to show you the jack stand method because I think that's the most complicated, and then we'll go from there. So pretty much every car out there has a safe jacking point in order to jack the car in the air. Because the surface area of the jack is quite small, we don't want to inadvertently dent the body of the car. So if we come underneath the car here and just look underneath, then we can see our jacking point right here. There's almost like two little notches next to it, and that's where our car jack will go right there. The reason that's there is because structurally it's a very strong part of the vehicle. You're not going to damage it, damage the body of the car, damage anything to do with the car by jacking the jack in this point right here. If you're not sure where it is, your service manual will tell you where the jacking points are in order to jack your car up safely. So we just want to jack the car up enough to get enough clearance for our jack stand here. And when we have enough clearance, we're just going to push this jack stand next to our jack right here. So we just want to jack the car up just enough so we can slide in our jack stand. We don't need to do it on a maximum setting or anything like that, unless your car is very low, in which case you may need to. We just need enough clearance to get our body underneath the car to drain the oil. So for this car, because it's naturally quite high, the jack stand at its lowest setting will be fine. And because we applied the parking brake or the handbrake, the back wheels aren't going anywhere, so don't be worried about the car rolling. So now we have enough clearance for our jack stand here. Put the jack stand under the same long lip here. Make sure it's not under any plastic or anything that could get damaged, and then slowly relieve the tension off the jack to put the car on one jack stand. So now we have the corner of the car on one jack stand. You can actually see if you have enough room for your body to get in. Sometimes you don't even need two jack stands. You might only need one, depending where your oil drain bolt is. We're going to have a look at that in a second. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to put both sides on jack stands so I get more room for filming to show you where that's going to be. I should mention one thing before jacking up the vehicle. Make sure the jack is on a nice solid foundation like this here. Don't put the jack on any weird cracks like this, and especially don't put the jack on soil or anything like that. It's just gonna sink. Make sure you're using solid concrete or a solid foundation to do this. So you may need to position the car in a different space if you can't get the jack lined up. So just a little safety tip here. We have the car on jack stands here. Never put the car on a jack. These things can fail and they can crush you. They won't hesitate to crush you and potentially kill you. Always put the car on solid material like these jack stands here, or even car ramps. Very, very important. But there's no real reason you can't use this as well. Make sure all the weight is on the jack stands of the car. But also put this here as a safety measure. Just put a tiny bit of weight on here. That way, if one of these fails, the car will also be supported by this. But make sure the primary weight of the car is on the jack stands. But it's just a nice safety measure to have as well. So the next thing we're going to do, the car is in the air, the car is safe. We're going to crawl underneath the car and try to find out where the oil is going to come out. There will be a bolt down there. And we're also going to try and find where the oil filter is. We know what the new oil filter looks like. We're looking for something that looks a little like this. So let's see if we can try and locate those two things. Now you can find this on Google, you don't even need to go hunting, but I will show you tips in order to do this. So you see this little black cylinder there? That actually looks like our oil filter, but let's crawl underneath the car and see if we can find them together. So this is where the cardboard comes in handy. The ground is quite wet right now, it's not a nice day to be out, so I'm going to push that underneath the car and we're going to be lying on that to keep nice and dry. So coming underneath the car, there's probably two bolts that you're going to find under here typically. One will be the oil drain bolt where we get the old oil out, and one will probably be a transmission bolt where we get out the old transmission fluid. So there's two different things here. The oil bolt will typically be under the engine. It's going to look like something like this. It's going to be one of the lowest points of the car. And we're going to be looking for a bolt around this big object right here. I see a little wetness there. That could be it right there. The other thing is a transmission bolt. Now a transmission looks a bit knobbly like this. You see how it has these kind of lines here, these spines, a few bolts going through. It's going to look a lot different. So you see it's a different material. It's almost like this one's darker and rusted, and this is a typical transmission. The other way you know it's a transmission is if your wheels kind of plug directly into it. So this is like a little axle here, and the transmission ultimately drives the wheels of the car. That's how you know that's a transmission and not an oil pan. So this is kind of what we're looking for right here. All this information will be on Google. I'm sure you can find a diagram, but if you can't, this is typically what we're going to be looking for. So we're going to be hunting for the bolt here, around here. It's nice and rusted. I think I found it here. I can feel it. So let's take a closer look at that one there. So that seems to be our oil drain bolt right there. Let's take a closer look. These can all be different shapes and sizes. They could be hex, they could be Allen wrench, it could be anything. This one looks like a typical hexagonal socket. So I'm going to try different size sockets on here to find out what size it is. So I've been testing different sockets and it looks like this is a 13mm. So if you have a Smart 4.4 2006, 13mm, but yours could be very different. Now, depending on what environment you live in, this bolt could be very stuck. There are a couple tips you can do in order to remove that bolt. Use some penetrating grease. So something like this, as long as it says it's for penetrating. There's also a WD-40, not the standard WD-40, but it will say penetrant or special penetrating grease. You can use that as well. PB blaster, all different types of things. We're just going to spray this on the oil drain bolt if it can't be removed and let that soak in. Give it 10-15 minutes or something like that. It could be one of the very first things you do. And optionally, if it's covered in rust, we can just use a wire brush to shake off some of that rust and get a good purchase on there. Now our oil drain bolt is hexagonal, so there's 6 sides on there. So you see this is a 6-sided socket, but there are some sockets that have different shapes. So for example, that one's 6, but this one, you can see there's a lot more sides on there. And when you use a socket like this, all of the strength is going on one of these minor pieces right here, so it doesn't get good purchase. So what you can do, if this bolt is really seized on, you could actually strip the bolt with something like this. Don't use something like this if it's only 6-sided. Make sure you use the correct socket that has 6 sides, and then it's not going to slip, it's not going to round the bolt off, and you're not going to damage it. If you damage the bolt, you will need a new one in order to drain the oil, so it's going to be a lot more painful to get it off. If you are dealing with a drain bolt that you just cannot remove, make sure you get a long wrench or long breaker bar, because if yours is very small, you're not going to get enough purchase on there. Something like that, it's going to be no good. Make sure you get a nice long one to get a lot of leverage, and then you're going to give yourself the best chance to remove this. So we're ready to remove the drain bolt now. One thing before you remove this bolt, remove the oil refill cap right here. The reason we do that is it allows for better flow of the oil when it's being drained out of the bottom. Okay, so I've got my oil catch pan right here. I've just removed a little plastic screw there. These may all look different depending which one you have. Unless it's something like that, then you don't need to remove anything. We're going to slide this under where the drain bolt is, slightly along a little bit, because it's going to kind of pour out that way, kind of like a waterfall. So we want to shove that under there, and then we're going to crack the bolt and start catching the oil. It's as simple as that. So I've loosened the drain bolt so I can do it with my fingers now. So hopefully I've positioned it in the right place. Let's remove this, and the oil should start draining out. Long. And there it is there. So all the oil is draining now. I think we got a pretty good position of the oil catch pan there. You can see there's like quite a nice flow there. It almost looks like a laminar flow. You almost don't realize the liquid is running there. So as that empties, you see it's kind of curling back a little bit more, so we might just need to adjust our pan a little there, just so it doesn't leak. But having cardboard underneath is key. You can get some stray drips here, so it is important. There shouldn't be too much in there. So while the oil is draining now, give it 5 minutes. It shouldn't take much longer than that. This is why we have cardboard here. The wind can get it. There's a lot of things that can cause this to spill everywhere, so it's always good to have rags and cardboard around. We're going to chase the oil filter now, see if we can replace that, and then we're going to start getting new oil in here. So in trying to find the oil filter is not going to be very far from the drain plug. Have a good look around. So there's our transmission that we talked about earlier. Definitely not that. Coming across, there's our oil sort of drain pan there. We're looking around, and that seems to be it right there. That little black cylinder there, that's our oil filter. It could be on the side, it could be on this side, it could be on the back side, but it will not be far away. So there it is right there. We can start undoing that. So engine oil in your car, it lubricates moving parts, moving metal objects, and in turn reduces the heat and reduces the friction between these parts. What can happen as a byproduct of this is you get impurities in the oil, maybe small metal filings, all different things. So the oil filter is designed to remove these parts. There's almost like a paper membrane inside of here. It's quite hard to see, but this will catch all of these elements in there. That is a crucial job of the oil filter. So because of that, this is going to be full of oil. So when we remove the old one, you will see some oil drop down. So what we're going to do, we're going to get our catch pan roughly underneath where the oil filter is. So when we start unscrewing this, the residual oil which lives inside the filter will drop into a bucket and not on our nice driveway. Well, nice-ish driveway. So depending on the year, make and model of car, the oil filter could be anywhere. This side, this side, this side. It could be easier to access from above or easier to access from below. It really depends. This car is kind of 50-50. I can easily snake my arms down there, but if I have chunky arms, then it's going to be better to get it from underneath. Now, oil filters should always be done kind of hand tight, or maybe even nipped off with that, but typically they should always be on their hand tight. So with that, it shouldn't be very hard to remove. But if you bought a used car, or it's kind of seized on or something like that, you don't know the history of it. So you may need a tool like this. This is an oil filter removal tool. It's basically just a rubber strap on there to get some purchase. But what I find is if you already have rubber gloves that you're working with, these can also give you enough purchase to get rid of this oil filter out of your car. It really depends on how seized or how tight the old one is on. Typically, these usually work 90% of the time. 10% of the time you might need a tool like this. We're basically going to hook this tool over the oil filter and pretty much just rotate it. It's very, very simple. The idea is we just want to unscrew this oil filter. If we look underneath the oil filter, you can see how it works. It actually gets threaded on right there. So to undo it, just left like a typical bolt. To tighten it, just like that. Sometimes this rubber gasket likes to seize on a bit. It makes it a bit harder. Maybe the thread's got a bit seized or rusty. So we just want to break this free. So let's kick our bucket underneath. There we go. It's roughly underneath where the filter is there. Then we're going to start turning the filter. Okay, I got a bit lucky with my filter. I was able to do it with my hands. So we can see that slowly come out there. So what's really annoying about these sometimes is the oil can leak on engine components, exhaust components, and when that happens and you run your car, this oil is going to heat up and you're going to smell it a little bit. What you can do is get some kitchen foil on these components so it drips off the kitchen foil or even plastic, and that way it's not going to get on your engine components and start causing a bit of a smell. If it does get on your engine components, you can use something like carb cleaner just to spray them down. If you use anything like carb cleaner, brake cleaner, then make sure you don't get it on the paint of your car. It can damage the paint. So it's just a little tip there. For the most part, it looks like it's just leaking on this exhaust shielding there. So I'm just going to spray that down with some brake cleaner or some carb cleaner or something like that to get it off. But again, if you want to try and cover that up, it's up to you. It just really depends on the location of these things. So this is how much oil lives inside an oil filter. It's not a whole lot, but it is a bit. And there's our old filter right there. Look at that. So there's something very important when replacing the oil filter which some people neglect. I did mention it briefly before. So you see this rubber gasket right here. This ensures that there's no leaks between the filter and the body of the car. And what happens is when you remove the old filter, the old gasket can actually get stuck to the car. So make sure the old one came away with the oil filter. In this case it did. But sometimes you remove these filters and the gasket is magically gone. It's disappeared. That's because it's attached to the car still. It's just seized on there. So what some people do is put the new filter on, and then you have two gaskets which can cause an oil leak. So that is something to be wary of. The next thing is when you have a filter and you're putting it on the car, make sure there's just a tiny bit of oil in there. Sometimes depending on the orientation, it might be hard to do. If it's orientated kind of like this, it's just going to drip out and make a mess. But see if you can get a little bit of oil in there. I'm just going to put a tiny drop in there just to lubricate the filter so we're not running on absolutely empty when we start the car. I can't imagine it makes much difference. There is a bit of debate online about this, but I like to put a tiny bit in before I put it on the car. So we're going to crack open our new oil here. I have a 5-litre jug. 5 litres will give you everything for this job on this car. Depending on what your car is, if you have a truck, a car, or anything like that, you might need more. So do check your service manual, or if you're using an AutoZone website or something like that, to determine how much you need. So that's our nice new jug of oil here. I'm just going to put a tiny dollop inside the filter so it's ready to go back on the car. Okay, because the position of my oil filter was kind of like that, I've just put as much oil in there as I can. It's covering the kind of paper membrane inside now. It's nicely lubricated. The last thing I'm going to do is get a tiny bit of oil and just go around the rubber ring there. So I'm not putting a totally dry seal on the car. You only need a tiny bit just to get a seal. It's very hard to do this with one hand and film. And that way we get a nice seal on the car. Okay, I think this is ready to go back in the vehicle. So as I mentioned, when putting on the new oil filter, just do hand tight as much as you can, and that should perfectly be enough. That is something you do not want to destroy. The threads on it is a very integral part of the engine. So just do it hand tight, and that should be plenty to keep that oil filter nice and secure and leak free. So it looks like our oil is finished draining there. I'm really glad I have that cardboard now. So let's take a look. It looks quite dark. It's quite heavy, in fact. Let's take a look at the quality of the oil. Now, oil should be changed around 7,500 to 10,000 miles. It is something you do need to do regularly. Very, very important. So let's take a look how black this is. Wow, that is almost pitch black, isn't it? So this will be all the impurities. It could be small metal particles from things rubbing together. It could be moisture from water and all things like that that can contaminate the oil. If you compare that to some brand new oil like this one here, you see how it's light brown and yellow. Good quality full synthetic oil here. It is night and day, isn't it? Look at that. So this is a necessary maintenance procedure. It is something we need to do, and I'm glad I'm doing it today. Okay, let's continue. So I'm just looking at putting this oil drain bolt back on the car now. Typically these will have a crush gasket. This is a copper crush gasket here, and it's designed really to be used just one time. It crushes against the bolt and the car to ensure an oil leak free situation. Most mechanics will reuse these, but if you keep reusing them, they can leak, so it is something to be wary of. You can get these from pretty much any auto parts stores out there. This is a very common job, so they will have them in stock, but it is something you should be wary about in case yours starts leaking. It's a good thing to replace these now, but I just thought I'd let you know. Okay, so we're going to put the oil drain bolt back on now. You want to put this to torque specification. This will depend on the year, make and model of the car. You can find it in the service manual. If you don't have a torque spec, don't go crazy with your wrench. Just give it a nice nip and then a tiny turn just to get it on there. We don't want to strip the bolts on this. It would be very bad. So the oil drain bolt is back on now. I've just got some brake parts cleaner here. Again, carb cleaner will work just to clean up those metal parts underneath because I spill oil on them. So when I removed the oil filter, it just caused a tiny bit of spillage there. It's actually the oil drain pan, so I'm just going to use some brake parts cleaner on there just to clean it up. Otherwise it's going to start smelling a bit when I'm driving. There we go. Easy as that. So the old oil from your vehicle right here, we can just take a funnel and fill up some 2-liter soda bottles or gallon milk jugs or something like that. Pretty much any recycling center will help you with recycling your old engine oil. Okay, we've drained the old oil. We've replaced the oil filter. The drain bolt is back on, and now we need to put new oil back here. Give the car a new lease of life and brand new oil. So let's do that now. So the thing we're going to need is a funnel to get our new oil in there. We're going to need to locate the oil refill port, which is this one right here. There's a little jug of oil on there. Almost looks like an Aladdin's lamp. And we don't refill the oil through the oil dipstick. Although you could if you wanted to, it would be very difficult. The oil dipstick just gives us a register on how much oil is in there, but there's not going to be hardly any in there because we just drained it all out. Now this car takes 3.4 liters of oil, so now we know how much oil to put in here. But how do we do that? Well, usually when you buy something like this is 5 liters of oil, there will be a gauge on the side. So we can see there's little notches there, and each one represents a liter of oil, or the mini notches represent probably 500 ml. It will say on the bottle, and there's a little gauge down the side. So if this is brand new, you know it's 5 liters. We just need to leave 1.6 liters behind to get our 3.4 liters of oil. It's very important you don't overfill the oil in the engine. It can cause problems. Equally, you don't want to underfill it. It can heat up prematurely and cause engine damage. So in order to check the capacity of the oil as we refill, if you're not sure about how much you have in there, we can use the oil dipstick right here. So the oil wants to sit between the 2 holes there, preferably more towards the top hole than the bottom hole. Okay, so let's get our funnel in there. Okay, now our funnel's in here, we just got to add the oil. A good tip is to actually tip from the side and not straight on like that. It gives a nice even pour. You're going to end up spilling a lot less. It's not a bad idea to put a towel around there as well, because when these are quite full, the first little bit seems to fly everywhere. So let's get a towel around there just in case. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Just like a little newborn baby funnel. Okay, so just add the oil nice and slowly, and it will slowly take the oil from you. Then you can start adding more. Okay, so based off the service manual and Google and my local auto parts store, it takes 3.4 liters of oil. It's a 5-liter jug. Each line is 500 mils. So we should be done when it reaches around here. So we have a little left to go, and then we're done with refilling the oil. Okay, so it looked like the towel worked pretty well. We didn't really spill anything there. So I've put in what I think is 3.4 liters. Give it time to settle, just a few minutes, and then we're going to check the level on our oil dipstick right here. It does sometimes take a few minutes to check that to get the correct level. So now we've added all the oil in here, we're just going to check the level on the dipstick. Take it out, give it a full wipe. Now it's wiped clean, we're going to put it back in the channel and get a reading and see where we're at. We should be roughly around where we need to be, but we can also add a little more if needed. So it looks like we're just a tiny bit under halfway. I'm going to add a tiny bit more just to finish up the oil job, and then I'm going to give it a drive around the neighborhood. Okay, I've just topped the oil up now. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go for a little drive just for everything to warm up and settle in. I'll do one final check, and that is pretty much it. That is how to change the engine oil on pretty much any car or truck out there. In a couple of days, just have a little look under the car to see if you're leaking any oil. It might be pretty obvious if it's just dripping on the floor, but something just to be cautious of around the oil filter area and the drain plug area as well. I just want to say a real quick message to our viewers. I made this channel a few years ago, and its primary aim was to give you the skills, but more importantly the confidence in order to tackle pretty much any DIY job you may have. In the process, we've saved our viewers thousands of dollars or pounds or euros, whichever currency you want to use. I've put multiple hours of time into making videos each and every week, which I somehow juggle between family and a full-time job. If any of our videos on our channel helped you, please support our channel by clicking the thanks button underneath any video on this channel. You can choose how much you wish to donate. It's going to go right back into the channel towards videos, tools, and everything else. So thank you very much for that. When you make a donation towards the channel, you can put an optional message, and your message will be highlighted along all the comments for everybody to see. The bigger the donation, the bigger the highlight, so everybody can see how awesome you are. Okay, so that is how to change the engine oil in your own car or truck. It's not the most glamorous job, it's not the cleanest job, but it will give you the confidence in order to do your own car repairs in the future. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe, it really helps the channel, and stay tuned because we have many more car videos to come. Take care.